Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Job Train How talent session. I'm Giles, your host for today's session. Absolutely delighted to be joined by Keith from Recite. We'll do some intros in a minute. So pleased that so many of you could join us this morning. It's certainly been a really popular session as we delve into inclusive recruitment for 2025. Before I get started, can I just check that everybody who has joined us on Crowdcast can see and hear me okay? If you could pop something into the chat, that would be amazing. And I believe we're also live on LinkedIn this morning as well. Yes, we are. So welcome to anybody that's joining us on LinkedIn live right now. Brill, people can hear us. Good, fantastic. So we want this session, as we do with all of these sessions, to be interactive. These sessions we put on for you to inform and educate and share insights and whatnot. So if you have any questions at all, do feel free to either pop them in the chat, or there is actually an Ask a Questions area as well. So as Keith and I go through this session this morning, we will answer any and all of your questions. We'll do our best. So now we can hear us. Let's get started. Keith, welcome. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Everybody here, do you want to give us a little introduction to you?
Yes. So my name's Keith. I work for Recite. I've been with Recite for 8 years now. My role with Recite is very much to work with clients, understand their aspirations around online inclusion and accessibility, and present obviously the work we do and the technology that we provide to get them there. Just to give a bit of further background context, I spent a good 12 years in recruitment myself. Frontline, mainly agency, did some in-house work as well, head of talent for a large brand printing company. So I understand the needs and the demands of both the recruiter and of the talent themselves as well, having been a candidate myself over the time. So yes, really excited to talk about this today with you and hopefully answer some of your questions as well if we can.
Bro, thank you so much. Oh, Beverly, good. So Beverly couldn't hear anything, but she can now, so that's good. Beverly, welcome this morning. So if we just start with, Keith, why is inclusivity when it comes to recruitment really important? I guess both in terms of recruitment, but also as an organisation.
Yeah, so it's massively important because inclusion drives the level of diversity that you have within your organisation. It gives people the ability and the power to be able to engage with you and be able to apply for roles and be able to kind of get in touch with you and inquire about careers with you as an organisation. If we look at it purely from a talent perspective, how vital inclusion is, I guess, to each organisation, it depends on how diverse you want to be, and a lot of that can be led certainly by the SLT, by your leadership team. You know how you want diversity to sit within your employer brand. I mean, I speak to employers and clients all the time. It seems to be a real priority, which leads me to believe that most, if not all, employers in the modern day, certainly 2025 and beyond, want to be inclusive as possible. They want to allow and attract and retain a very diverse talent pool, I'd imagine.
And that, I guess, is why it's important for an employer brand in terms of, but how do you best sort of go around communicating that? I mean, I guess it's I think everybody recognises that accessibility inclusion is really, really important. But I'm kind of interested in terms of how an organisation can help make it live and breathe, because it's one thing having a great career site, perhaps including quite a lot of information about why accessibility and inclusion is important, but it's like how best organizations can bring it to life, and perhaps that's actually putting things into practice.
Yeah, when you put things into live and breathe, it's about how you experience things, not necessarily just saying what you're going to do, because I do see a lot of organizations with a huge amount of intent in their wording and what they want to do, and the pages on their website tell us that they're very inclusive and accessible. But then you might click on an apply now button on their careers website and it's just not inclusive at all. So the living, breathing part is actually injecting tangible, experience-led features into your application process or your candidate experience, however you want to terminology, injecting that stuff in there so people can actually experience it and live and breathe it when they're going through that journey. Then I guess that gives you the full confidence and right to go out and promote the fact that you are being inclusive and accessible, because that will only take you so far. It'll be great in a conversation that you deem yourself to be inclusive and accessible, but if the feedback then starts coming through, candidates aren't being able to get through to a certain stage of the application process. Maybe the testing stage was quite difficult because it was mainly reading, and maybe someone with dyslexia might struggle with that element, but there's no way of instantly feeding that back whilst they're going through that process. And maybe the response or the scores that are coming through are dictating how they proceed with that. So it's about putting those tangible and livable experiences into the different stages of the journey that you possibly can. And a lot of this, it starts with planning. It's not just about doing something because you think it's the right thing to do. It's really important, and I talk a lot about this to clients, even when they're considering using Recite Me, because not all the time, we won't always be the right thing to do. We want clients to be able to plan what they want to achieve, understand what they want to achieve from an employer brand point of view, how inclusive they want to be, why diversity will impact them in a positive way, and then what technology will help them get there. And let's look at what you've got so far, where it's sitting, and then where they want to be, and then we can work out the journey from there and how we can help them from that point of view.
Brilliant. Yeah, we might delve into technology in a short while.
Yes.
Just before we do, so obviously we've been working with Recite Me for actually probably about the same time now. I think about 8 years.
Probably about 7-8 years, yeah, I'd imagine.
And back then, in terms of 8 years ago, it was certainly a bit of a process of education for us as a recruitment software provider. And we first of all wanted to make sure that our candidate experience, the one that we deliver for our customers, was accessible. But then we got to understand a little bit more about going way beyond that and actually being inclusive. So for everybody here, can you draw a distinction between, or explain the difference between, let's say, an accessible website or an accessible candidate experience and an inclusive one? Because there is quite a marked distinction between the two.
There is, yeah. Whenever I speak to a client, it's always really important to distinguish between the two of those, because there will be a lot of people who say, well, we're being accessible already, and it might be the fact that they've got a Google Translate drop-down option in their website, and to them that is them being inclusive or accessible. Being accessible on your website probably involves quite a bit more work and a little bit more consideration, because it comes down to the actual build of your website. There are legalities around this and levels of compliance that you meet. There are, and a lot of this might be new to a lot of the audience, but WCAG, so Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the guidelines, a bit of education for you. These are the guidelines that developers will work towards when they're building accessibility into your website. And they're managed at 3 levels: 1 at A, AA, AAA. Single A is must do. And this includes careers websites as well, quite importantly. Single A is the must do stuff. That's just things that should be embedded into your website that will allow assistive technology to enhance the experience for the user that is accessing your website. AA is the should do. These are the levels where most people are now aspiring to be. And this is the stuff you should be doing in this day and age. AAA is more of the nice to have. You're not going to be knocked down too much if you're not having it, but it's great if you do. So the accessibility piece is about having that website that is built in a way that welcomes assistive technology and allows the user to access it. Inclusivity and inclusion with a website, it's about, the way I word it, it's about the user experience. And it's about making sure that the content that you are providing is inclusive to the individual. And the way you can do that is by making it personable. So, and the way you make it personable is by giving people options. Because I can guarantee you could get, even if we look at dyslexia alone, you could get 5 people in a room who are all dyslexic. And I can guarantee what sometimes I've got dyslexic colleagues and friends, what their settings would be very different between the 5 of them. So the color contrast, font sizes, how imagery affects the way they process information, motion graphics, all that kind of stuff. it will all be different. So actually inclusion for us is providing the ability for an individual to personalize the way they view content on the page that works for them and their needs. Hope that
That's really helpful.
clarifies it. Yeah.
So in summary, if you have an accessible website, it's more readily readable by you've got assistive technology, but anybody that may have some form of a disability may use bits of tech, bits of kit, bits of software in order to help them to read and understand what's included on a website. So that's kind of accessibility. And even within that, I know you've got sort of you've got AA and AAA, but there's varying degrees in terms of compliance. I know this, we've just gone through a process with the Shore Trust, and even though we work with you guys, we wanted to make sure that our candidate experience was fully accessible. And we actually, rather than you can have some automated tools that can read your website and give you some recommendations to where things may need to be changed. We had a full audit done of the whole of our candidate experience, but that included people with varying disabilities actually going through and actually practically testing it and basically trying to find all barriers, all those kinds of things. So that's accessibility. But inclusion actually goes beyond that in terms of providing a lot of the tools, perhaps even sometimes to replace the assistive technology. So it just sits there on the site that helps all manner of people to more readily read, understand, consume, and use your website.
Yeah. And we do get, one of the most common questions I've had over 8 years is, surely if somebody needs assistive technology, they'll already have it. And it's probably one of the biggest myths that exist out there when it comes to this topic. Because we're adding the toolbar to the website, we're basically promoting the idea that anybody might need to use this toolbar, not somebody who is necessarily just diagnosed with a condition or a barrier or is aware of a barrier. They may not even be diagnosed with dyslexia, but find themselves struggling with a website for some reason. So the idea behind the tool, the idea around making a website inclusive is that we want it to be accessible to anybody. And it might just be somebody who's left their reading glasses at home and really struggles with small text on a website. It might be somebody who is quite severely dyslexic but doesn't have their own assistive technology. It's expensive equipment, it's expensive technology. And the reason why Recite specifically exists is Ross, our MD, is dyslexic himself. And he found having one license of one piece of assistive technology quite limiting because it was only on one computer. So whenever he moved anywhere else, or he wanted to use a different device or whatever else it may be, he didn't have that technology anymore. So he was kind of back at square one. We're actually having something like Recite or something similar on a website, making it inclusive. You can access it on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your desktop. You're going to access it abroad. You can access it at home, on your holiday, wherever you are. Because it's embedded on a website, it's always there. So it's like a friend that will keep coming back to you because you're accessing that particular website.
So tell me, how does the toolbar work? Because for everybody here, perhaps he hasn't had any experience of either assistive technology or what you do. Explain what Recite does.
So again, kind of covered a little bit of it there. So it is a toolbar. The toolbar itself, Recite toolbar, sits within your website. It doesn't launch automatically. It's there for people who need it. We don't want to confuse people or overload people who don't need the assistive technology. So you would simply create a button for your website, which would typically have accessibility tools or accessibility help. We've had some clients go with listen and translate. It depends on, I guess some clients have a real focus around why they're adding the toolbar. Some have language as one of their main. I mean, I work with a lot of councils where the language side of it is really important to them. The neurodiverse and the visual impairment stuff is great, but actually that they have a real audience that need to have that translation piece in play. And once you launch it, it creates, again, the ability for an individual to go in and pick and choose how they perceive that content and how they view it. So it's things like a screen reader, so you can switch to Audible if you want to. If you find the reading really challenging and you just want to listen to the website, you can do that. You can change fonts, colors, obviously a big part of inclusion and accessibility. So you can change the background color, the foreground color of the text. You can even change the cursor size of your mouse. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I don't know how many hours I spend a day trying to find where my mouse is on one of my screens. So actually enlarging that mouse pointer again, it's such a little tweak, but to some individuals, that might just make their journey on that website, specifically a careers website, just a little bit quicker and a little bit easier because they're able to navigate a little bit better with the pointer on the page. Language is obviously a big part of it. So 130 languages, half of them have a voice to them because there will be a crossover of people who have English as a second language, but are also dyslexic or colorblind or have a visual impairment. And I guess a good point to make there is there will be a lot of people who have English as a second language who can speak English quite well. So the speaking part isn't the main concern with the toolbar. It's about taking a lot of content in English and making it more inclusive to that individual. So if they find reading that job description in their own language just a little bit quicker and a little bit easier for them, that's what it's there for. It's about inclusion. It's not about picking individuals out and giving set requirements. If you're dyslexic, press this button. If you've got ADHD, press this button. It's about just giving options, soft options for people to be able to pick and choose. The settings will apply. They can view the website content the way they want to. Then once they're finished, they can obviously leave the website. If they don't clear their history or clear the settings, they can come back to the same settings that they had last time. So it all works to try and give the best possible experience, but obviously make it as inclusive as possible as well.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that the toolbar is amazing, and it's probably, in terms of some of the tools or like complementary tools that are used within JobTrain, I think Recite Me is probably the most widely used and adopted within our client base, which is really encouraging. Yeah. But when you look at inclusive recruitment for an inclusive candidate experience, it's not necessarily just about catering for people that may have a specific disability or disabilities. It's really important to consider everybody that may be applying for roles with you.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's often overlooked. So I think it's important to bear in mind that a lot of people that may be applying for roles perhaps do not have a laptop or a MacBook or even a tablet. A lot of people now, and I think I've forgotten the latest stats here, but I think it's now creeping up to more like 78% of candidates are now typically applying using a mobile device. So probably a smartphone like this. They may well be doing it on the move. The stats about when and where people are typically searching for jobs and things. So a lot of people apply for roles while sat in bed. I can't remember the stats around it.
Watching Emmerdale or Coronation Street, just kind of, I remember searching for jobs on my phone and I would literally be just sat at home on my sofa, just scrolling through jobs and finding them. And yes, if there was one that I particularly liked, I might jump on my laptop so I could write the application a little bit better. But I think there is a lot of, the culture these days, there will be a lot of people just sat scrolling and finding what they want to find, then maybe elaborating once they get the chance to, I think.
Totally. And I think showing consideration in terms of the candidate experience is very, very important. So, for example, if the first thing you've got to do when you start applying is, nominating a password and all this kind of stuff and forcing people to register, all these things can be a barrier to simply applying.
Yeah.
The language you use within your candidate experience application process also needs to be really clear, hopefully quite engaging and inviting, not too cold. You want people to perform their best when they're applying for roles with you, but also to be really, really clear. And I know it sounds really obvious, but just using plain English, also inclusive language as well. All these things need to be factored in. And I will always bang the drum on this and making sure that initial application form isn't too long. Ideally, it should be probably less than about 3 minutes. You can always go back and ask more information at a later date, but only capture what you need in order to make an initial informed assessment of whether that candidate's a potential fit for the role they've applied for.
Yeah, totally.
And the other stuff later on. And I think that is very, very important. So the clarity of the application process. Setting expectations to candidates through the process. So I'm going to complete my application form. How long is it going to take me to complete? How long do I need to give myself? What information is going to be required before I can successfully complete an application form? What happens after I've submitted my application form? How soon am I going to hear from you? Am I going to hear from you? And what does the rest of the recruitment process look like? So all of these things make for a whole variety of people the process in itself more inclusive. So these are some quite practical steps, even if you weren't to implement an accessibility and inclusion toolbar. These are things that you can do to help everybody that applies for roles.
I think there's merit in actually, when somebody clicks apply now, is actually giving them the candidate journey in front of them and actually asking them
Mhm.
to accept that they're happy to go through that, and giving
Yeah.
them the option of being able to, am I, as a candidate, am I happy to go through that journey? And if not, be able to give feedback as to why, because that could provide valuable feedback as to, well, I'm dyslexic, so I wouldn't be able to do that testing element of it. And this is why. And I think some of that information is a lot of the time missed because candidates will just drop out, and they don't want to necessarily promote that they've got dyslexia or put their hand up and say I'm dyslexic.
Mhm.
Maybe a lot of people will just be used to being, I guess, cast out a little bit, and they're used to an online experience not accommodating their needs. So I think sometimes just putting in front of them the true journey that they're going on. But then if they're not happy with part of the journey, before they click apply and before they get to a point where it's too late, some of their information's been submitted, they actually get the chance to question it and actually say, well, can this happen instead? Because that might not work for me as an individual, but I can give you the information, but maybe not in that format. So I think there's a lot of merit in that as well, I think, to be honest, which I haven't seen a lot of, but I haven't applied for a job for a while. So it might be happening, it might not, but I think that's a great way of approaching kind of certainly diversity as well.
Yeah, definitely. So those clear signposts, either first of all showing or stating that your website is accessible is really
Yeah,
important.
yeah,
If you can include accessibility and inclusion tools like Recite Me,
yeah,
use really clear language, set clear expectation. Don't expect candidates to run the gauntlet if they're applying using a mobile. All these
yeah,
things show consideration in terms of you being inclusive and wanting to make sure that anybody that might be interested in joining your organization can do easily. Perhaps also give them the opportunity to feedback if they do experience some difficulties or some specific challenges too.
yeah. And that's the winning. That's when you cross the start line. Is when you throw kind of think when you put thought into it. If you're not thinking about this stuff and it's not on your radar, that's the worrying part. If you're thinking about it at the very least and contemplating what you want to do as an employer to make your experience for candidates more inclusive, that's where you're winning. It just then takes a little bit more to then start preparing, planning, researching, understanding what you want to achieve, what you want the candidates to experience, and then look at tools like Recite, but other tools that offer video interviewing or kind of interactive tests and things like that that maybe take it away from the whole cold hard piece of paper type written test that we would all expect from yonder age. But yes, I think the thought part of it is a really important point to make, is at least if you start thinking about it and start exploring, that's when the doors will start to open and things will start to happen, I guess, from a diversity point of view.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Keith, but
Oh, God.
video. There's always a lot of debate around the use of video, either as part of the application experience or post that with as part of the assessment and interviewing experience. From what you know and understand, what are the pros and cons around using video? Because I imagine there's some people it might be a far more convenient way of applying or going through an assessment process, but I imagine for others it could be quite overwhelming.
This plays perfectly into the message we're kind of send, I guess, because it can have the pros and cons for me might be different to somebody who might walk through that door right now. It's completely different from one individual to the next. I mean, I personally, which sounds strange, I don't necessarily like being on camera, and I don't like doing things on camera, which is really weak. So I'm starting a webinar with you, Giles. But for me, sat in front of a camera, doing an interview or doing a test or something like that might be uncomfortable for me, not from a neurodiverse perspective, but maybe more from a confidence, self-confidence, self-awareness type point of view. There's so many different factors that can come into it when we're talking about video use of video. Some people might absolutely love sitting in front of a video and giving a great portrayal of themselves and talking through it. It's difficult to give a straightforward answer as in the pros and cons, because I guess I could give you what my perception of the pros are and what the cons are. I guess convenience comes into it. For a lot of the workforce now, a lot of it's remote. So I guess for an individual who doesn't necessarily want to travel to do the interview because they plan to work remotely anyway, they don't want to travel 200 miles to London to the head office to do an interview to then come home again. the video interview could be a convenience and a really kind of great way of getting through that stage of the interview process without having to, one, spend money and two, kind of escape the world that they're probably used to. But then again, you've got, you might have a candidate who is autistic and finds the whole interaction across camera really difficult. But it might not even be autism. Like I said, it might just be what I feel in terms of lack of confidence on a camera and talking to people. There are pros and cons across it all, but I think you'd have to. It's difficult to say, let's do video because of this, or let's not do it because of this, because it will be down to each candidate. But I guess you could give them the option of being able to do that. Again, it's about that candidate journey, isn't it? And saying, well, there will be a video interview involved in this. Is that comfortable for you? Would that work for you? Or do you want us to explore another avenue to be able to, for us to interview you? So I know that's not a straightforward answer, but I guess, again, it falls into the whole why we deliver the toolbar. It might not work for some. It might work for others. It'll work for some in one way and it'll work for others in a different way. There's so many different metrics and measures that you've got to take in play. It's really difficult one to kind of estimate, I guess, in terms of how successful or how kind of poor choice, I guess, it will be to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of choice. Wherever possible, if you think that a part of your recruitment process could potentially present a challenge for some groups of people, wherever you can, see if you can put forward alternative options or ask them to indicate whether that is okay for them or they would like totally. Other considerations to be made as part of the assessment process.
Yeah, I think confidence comes from empowerment, and I think if you put choice in the path of a candidate, I think that gives them a level of empowerment that they're actually, because, I remember, again, I haven't been through an interview process a long time, but you kind of feel in the clutches of the company that you go into interview with a little bit, and you feel like you haven't really got a lot of control because you feel like you're trying to prove yourself to them. Yeah. But I think little things like this can balance it out a little bit more, kind of giving candidates the awareness that they do have a level of empowerment around what the journey might look like. Naturally, as a company, you want to get that information from them, but surely giving the candidate the option of being able to do it in a way that they do it best will only benefit you as an employer because you're getting that information in the best possible way. So I think, again, like you said, choice, options, giving people the forethought that this will be part of the journey. Is that comfortable? If not, how would you best navigate around that? Is there anything we can do to help, navigate that as well? Which isn't always easy, but it shows a lot of intent as an employer to a potential candidate with a lot of relevant skills and ability that you actually invest in your employees and that you want to be that employer before they've even applied for the job, if you know what I mean. I don't know whether that sounds confusing.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it's an important thing to consider if you have career site content or even a career site, or even if you don't, perhaps including some of this this information within a job advert. So making it really clear from the outset that you are an inclusive employer, that you do want to present people with choice, or if they have specific requirements that they're able to communicate those and that they'll be considered. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think there's also a balance, isn't there, about not putting people off by telling them what the journey is, but also you kind of want to emphasize that you're telling them because you want it to be an option, not we're telling you because this is what you must go through. It's about giving them the description of what the journey will be, but then really drilling it home that actually we're telling you this because we want it to be better if we can make it better, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, mine's gone blank. Doesn't happen very often.
It would happen on a webinar, wouldn't it, Giles? Timing.
But yeah, I mean, I think overall, it's just showing that consideration through the whole process. And the more you can communicate the fact that you are mindful of inclusion right out the outset, it's going to actually invite more people to your organization. People are going to feel more comfortable, more at ease. And ultimately, as you said, Keith, during the recruitment process itself, we all want people to feel that they've got the ability to perform. I think too often people go through an interview or a recruitment process, and obviously it's quite nerve-wracking, so it's quite a lot at stake. and it feels very much like you're under the spotlight, you're under pressure.
Yeah,
But
totally.
ultimately,
We know it's a two-way street, don't we? We all,
very much
and
so.
recruiters and employees will say that it's a two-way street. We want you and your abilities and your skill as much as you want this job. And it always fit you. I think it always felt for me like I was battling against the people interviewing me to kind of try and get the job. And it probably was never the case, but I think you build it up that way. But like you said, I think the more you balance it out and give the candidate that freedom and empowerment to be able to say this works for me and this doesn't, it can go such a long way from an employer brand point of view as well, and how they perceive you as an employer before they've even accepted a job.
Absolutely. And actually, that's something else that people who might even consider is actually, for a lot of people, obviously, that's certainly true of you, Keith, because you haven't been for an interview in 8 years. I've been for one in more years than I care.
A little bit longer, let's just say, a little bit longer.
But reminding people that, this is very much a two-way dialogue. People shouldn't feel nervous, that you want them to succeed and do well. And interview hints and tips and all those types of things are all designed to make people feel a little bit more at ease before they go through the recruitment process.
Totally.
Thanks, Laura and Sammy, for your comments as well. Absolutely, regarding reasonable adjustments. Sometimes you may sort of think of those as just always being there, but perhaps not everybody considers making it really clear to people, are there things that we can do to help you during the recruitment process? Very, very important.
Yeah, and I think just touching on that, I think there's, certainly when you become an employee as well, there's a lot of obviously kind of focus on the physical aspect of, are you comfortable at work? Do you need to readjust? Do we need to do anything with your laptop or your computer or your seat and your positioning and where you work? We don't really think a lot about kind of online interaction as well. Does that work for you? Kind of the intranet, can you access that? Is that inclusive? If you want to apply for a job internally, is the internal job application process inclusive for you as well? So I think that reasonable adjustment thing has to cross over more into the digital space as much as it does the physical aspect of it as well.
Yeah, totally. So we've talked about a little bit about accessibility, then assistive technology. We've talked about the candidate experience and the recruitment process experience and how that can be made inclusive. So we've got a lot there. But what are the risks if you aren't doing, or you simply don't prioritize inclusivity?
I mean, let's start with just simply being left behind. I speak to so many employers who are focused on inclusion, being a very accessible employer, making the candidate and employee experience as positive and as personable as possible. I think if you stop, with anything, it doesn't have to be inclusion, but if you stop focusing on something and just let it ride and don't keep up with other trends and organizations that are doing the same thing, especially if your direct competitors are doing something a little bit different, you can be left behind, and candidates will leave you behind as well, and they'll go on to work for other companies and they'll get the benefits of those skills and ability. So I think, legacy employer with dated and inadequate processes and experiences is a huge risk. Nobody wants to be that at all. I think alienating strong talent across all levels of roles within the business, and we're talking from entry level to board level. I'd like to think people aren't, in the thought process that people at board level don't have neurodiverse conditions and certain levels of barriers. I mean, our MD and owner, Ross, is dyslexic himself. If we look at legacy kind of, business successes like Richard Branson, he was dyslexic, which led him into his own entrepreneurship and kind of exploring other avenues. There will be all kind of roles within the company that you'll be recruiting for that will attract talent who are neurodiverse or have visual impairments, have, need some kind of level of support. So not keeping up with inclusion will alienate some really strong talent over the years. I guess the positive is that you will never know, but is that a positive? The real positive would be to attract this talent and be able to keep them and have them affect your business in a positive way. We don't want to be losing candidates to competitors or to other organizations. I think enhanced challenges around meeting business targets. You could be missing good salespeople, people who might really drive the business forward. So So that is a risk, kind of losing particular talent around that area and not meeting the actual overall business targets that are set. But also there's other targets you've got to think about. Recruitment. You might, the company might set certain recruitment targets around diversity, and how they want that to be met. And again, if you're not making your application process inclusive, you're shutting the door. The door is only ajar slightly. The more inclusive it gets, the wider the door opens. So the more people will come through the application process. And that's what you've got to think about at every stage of the journey. From the careers part of it, the careers website, to the applicant tracking system, to an LMS, to an intranet. The more open it is, the more people will come through it, because you are literally opening that door to a wider range of people. So to meet those recruitment targets, just got to consider, how do we open up that application process? How do we open up the business to more diversity? And the last challenge I want to kind of mention, the targets, is diversity and culture targets. I speak to so many employees now who have D&I leads, or employ a D&I consultant, or consult with an organization who are specialists in diversity and inclusion. And they set their own targets around how they want diversity, but also how they want the culture of the business to look. So, how do we want this business to be perceived internally, externally? How do we want that experience to be from the candidate clicking apply to them becoming an employee? How do we meet those targets? What do we want to achieve? And again, it's about planning. It's about understand. Don't just set any old targets, and you need to really sit down and think about what you want to achieve as an organization, and look to do that in the right way, and work with companies like ourselves, D&I consultancies, companies like JobTrain, to make sure that you're getting the right journey in play, with regards to the candidate journey. I think reduction in creative thinking. I don't think I'm telling anybody anything new, that with neurodiversity comes another level of thinking, certainly a more creative thought process. So again, stripping the company away of that creative thinking could be really detrimental and a massive risk to the organisation. And again, that could be at any level of the organisation. That could be at board level, where it's really critical decisions that are being made. But it also could be somebody on a sales floor, in HR, in IT, whatever it might be. You might just make that really that little critical change to the business that might make the world difference. Overall, your candidate experience looking dated, not relevant to the modern candidate audience. I think the modern candidate audience know a lot more about diversity and inclusion than certainly past generations of employers and candidates. Really important to meet that need, and make sure that the journeys are as modern as possible. One more promise: roles being left unfilled longer than expected. You might have a really exciting opportunity that you think will be filled within a week or so. Without that door being open to a real diverse mix of candidates, might not be the case. And you might be scratching your head as to why. But again, it's just opening that door to a wider range of people with different thought processes and different ways of doing things. Might make, for you as well as an employer and as a recruiter, a much more interesting experience, because you're meeting different people with different approaches to things. And it might just change the way you recruit as well. So I'm hoping there's enough there for people to feed on in terms of risks that might kind of crop up.
I really like that last point about opening your mind up as well as opening up your process to meeting a lot of very different people. Because let's face it, ultimately we all have bias, either conscious or subconscious bias as we go into things, and it's always going to exist. But the most important thing is just to simply be aware of that. But if you open your mind and your doors to seeing very different groups of potential candidates or even employees, sometimes that can very quickly challenge your own thinking in terms of the profile or kind of person you thought you wanted to hire within your organization, within that team, within that function. And I love that idea of suddenly being challenged or suddenly being really surprised by somebody that is different, but could potentially see the role or even carry out the role in an entirely different way, because they might be diverse of thought.
It's difficult at the early stage of looking at candidates, because you are typically looking at a CV a lot of the time, and what you might delve into is word searching and skill searching. and it's a shame with it. Kind of a CV will always be quite flat in that sense, because you do expect people to kind of be positive about themselves, and that's generally the rule. But it's really hard to pick on those really special skills that people might bring with a certain kind of added element that will affect the business in a way, and it's not something that will stand out or scream out on a CV. And it's a really difficult thing to do, is to find candidates from a CV that bring that kind of special attribute. But I guess that's where making the candidate journey more inclusive, hopefully that light bulb will go off at some stage in the process. But if the journey isn't inclusive, that light bulb might never sound. God, this sounds very Jerry Springer, last thought. But if that light bulb doesn't shine, you'll never spot that candidate, at all. But I think that's where the inclusive journey can help, where other parts of the application process might fall down in trying to highlight the special kind of abilities of an individual. Hope that makes sense. Yeah,
totally. And something we haven't touched on, because obviously, Keith, you're from Recite Me, so we've been looking at how to help people who might be disadvantaged in some way in terms of a disability. They might be neurodiverse or what have you in terms of applying. But it's really important not to overlook a whole wider pool of talent. So these may be people that have been displaced from the workforce for some reason. They might have faced long-term illness, they may have been a stay-at-home parent, they may have been in the armed forces and then suddenly come into the world of work and maybe struggling a little bit. They may even be ex-offenders. And we touched on a little bit of this with Bridge of Hope Careers. If you're interested in finding out more, then do let us know. But there are a lot of organisations out there can actually help you to reach a whole pool of candidates you may have never previously considered. And as Harriet's saying, some roles have limited numbers of people for occupational shortages. Absolutely. But I think the more we open our mind to welcoming everybody and hopefully reaching everybody, not just the norm, then that can only be of benefit to us as organisations. Harriet goes on to say a lot of candidates are using AI to draft their submissions. Yes, they are. Just as we are embracing AI in terms of our working lives, or looking at how it can be practically applied to automate elements of the recruitment process, taking some of the grunt work out of the recruitment process, candidates are doing just the same things. In fact, even people applying to buy Oasis tickets are now being excluded because they use bots to try and buy them. But there's clever people, and I think ultimately those people that are using AI effectively or creatively, or have a good level of understanding, are the types of people that we do ultimately want to be engaging with. But what we don't want is to have 25, 30 candidates apply whose applications are pretty much a carbon copy of one another because they've just thrown whatever it is into ChatGPT. What I would say to you, Harriet, is that what we're finding is that those organisations that are inviting some form of a personal statement, maybe a cover letter, are those that are probably most susceptible to candidates using AI. I was going to say abusing, but it's the wrong word. They're basically utilizing generative AI in order to produce responses. We are now very much encouraging the customers that we work with that are experiencing these types of challenges to look at using assessment forms far more effectively within the application process. And by assessment forms, I mean questionnaires. So they might be simple yes/no answers. They may be based on, let's say, situational judgment test, might be based on values, on skills. All of that can be done, but AI can't be, or generative AI can't be used to try and fool or trick those questionnaires, because you'll have scores or weightings behind the responses. So that, first of all, allows you to far more readily see those people that are a particularly good match against the role or against your organization if it's more values-based. And then it can pretty much eradicate AI-driven applications that come in. It says we also try to support care leavers who are disadvantaged when applying. Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at care. There's the people that tend to have the strongest predisposition towards care are sometimes people that aren't used to using technology. They may not have applied for a role for a very long time. Perhaps they've been caregivers, perhaps for a friend or close relative or children, like a stay-at-home mum, but they have these amazing qualities that means they could be amazing carers, but the recruitment process itself can seem a little bit overwhelming. And it's one of the reasons why, as an ATS, we try and help. All candidates apply for roles via our platform can access a telephone number and a person to speak to on the end of the phone. We will quite often, our support team will help people get through that recruitment process or give them a degree of confidence about what they're doing and things. So it's making sure that help is on hand for people right when they need it as part of the recruitment process, and that people can feel confident to put their hand up to say, I need help, this isn't clear, this is a bit overwhelming, can you help me out, or can you do something slightly different to support my needs? I think that's very, very important. Anything else from you, Keith, that we perhaps haven't covered this morning?
I think just touching on that as well, because there will be a massive diverse of candidates applying for jobs from different backgrounds, from different experiences. And I talked about before about planning, and then planning the journey that your candidates go on is really important. Working with your third-party providers, design agencies, in-house design team, whoever looks after your careers website, your applicant tracking system like JobTrain, or if you build it internally, whatever it might be, it's about the right planning and looking at the journey and thinking on a more general level and putting that thought process into practice and thinking, well, would this be beneficial for someone who might be dyslexic, and tap into any disability networks that you have internally, or any individuals who are happy to share their experiences from other applications that they've done with you or in the past that have proven quite difficult, and just try and draw on as much resource that you've got. A lot of the time with your digital agencies or whoever's managing your careers website, you're paying them for a service. I'm sure they won't mind giving you as much information and support as you want to understand, even if it's just understanding a little bit more about accessibility and inclusion on the careers website. But definitely the planning stage is really important.
Keith, do you know of any sort of D&I consultancy you'd recommend if people want a bit of extra help or some consultancy? Because potentially that's something we can add in. We're going to write at the end of this session, we will sort of produce a bit of a blog post which we'll send out to everybody that registered to attend. So perhaps we can include some useful links for you as well within that to help you get started.
I mean, the one person I would definitely advocate is Jo Major. She has a company called Diversity in Recruitment. Amazing. I mean, I've done webinars with Jo and some of her partners. She's a great person to talk to about D&I in the recruitment space. She's a past recruiter herself, and she's moved into the world of D&I and supporting recruiters, employers get it right and understand a little bit more. But I can share with Giles Jo's LinkedIn page or contact details if anybody wants to reach out to Jo and set up some time with her.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. So in summary, there's a lot of very simple, practical things you can do to make sure you're considering inclusivity for the whole of your recruitment process that aren't going to cost a thing. It's just about applying, basically actually going through your own recruitment process and challenging yourself as to, is this clear? Is it easy to follow? Do I set clear expectations? Is it very obvious to people that if they need a slightly different approach or have specific needs, that those are catered for, and you're making it really clear that you're open to that? And then there are other things, and probably a little bit more technical in terms of making sure that your website is, first of all, accessible for those that do use their own assisted technology. Lots of tools out there like JAWS and what have you. Or you can go even further and then look at a specific accessibility and inclusion toolbar to be included in your website, like Recite Me.
Yeah.
Then you can look at the rest of your recruitment process. Obviously, it's training for hiring managers and what have you, all around inclusion. And finally, if you want to tap into a wider talent pool, there's a whole range of different ways you can do that. I have popped a link through to Bridge of Hope Careers, who are an inclusive job board, but there are so many local charities as well that you can work with, and actually really keen to work with and engage with employers who are open to basically including everybody and reaching as wide a pool of people as possible. So any other final comments, Keith, before we wrap up this morning?
think we've covered quite a bit there. I think it's pretty. I think what we've covered is really, really good. I think we've certainly kind of covered a lot of the key points there. Just to emphasise and just to kind of go off what you've said there again around practical ways to drive diversity. Understand what you want to achieve first of all. Really explore that. Even get a group together of people within the organisation to explore that. Once you know what you'd like to focus on, spend some time researching it. Don't be afraid to ring technology companies like us or JobTrain, because nobody likes to know it all. We prefer clients who actually don't know much about the topic, and we get to educate them and talk to them about what they want to achieve and give them some real insight. There's nothing more rewarding than that. So please, don't be shy to not just speak to us. But if you're looking at wanting to do certain things within inclusion and diversity, and it involves technology, and if technology isn't necessarily your thing, the best thing you could do is ring a company who knows all about it, because it'll give you the resources and the information that you need to move forward. And at one call, you could probably walk away with a lot more information than you had previously. Again, leverage resources internally. Make sure that you tap into as much of that you have, whether it's an in-house design digital team, whether it's a disability network. Ask for their advice on what you should do next, or how you should proceed with certain things. Again, things like the toolbar are great, but also look at accessibility and the deeper issue of making the website accessible, because our toolbar is only as good as how accessible the website is. So that's a really important topic as well. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of my summary as well.
Right. Well, thank you. I really hope that this has been helpful for everybody here. Massive thanks to Keith for all of your time this morning. Poor Keith was quite ill last week with a very nasty man flu, so I'm glad to see you recovered and feeling well. If any of you need any help, have any follow-up questions, we're here, not just on these sessions, but any time at all. And I look forward to welcoming you to our next session, which is going to be in March, which is with the Talent Labs. So we're going to be looking at how to future-proof your recruitment strategy with insights and tools for 2025. And that's going to be on the 12th of March at 11 a.m. With Suki Carey, who's the head of membership experience at Talent Labs. It's going to be a really, really good session. So hope to see you there. But I hope you all have a great week, and look forward to seeing you soon. And thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.